Okay, so this is kind of where we left off in the layer portion in previous episodes. And if you haven't seen the creation of the Rust material and all of that, I'm going to link in the description because you can also download the material that we're going to use here. The first thing I want to do is to drag in my Rust material and start to balance this. As you can see here, I have disabled all my previous material assignments that we used in the previous episodes. I'm only here having the base projection. I'm gonna start to make this Rust material look something like the one down here, quite dark. Yeah, so let's look at this flat shaded essentially here, base color, and say current channel. Let's try and create something like that. I'm just gonna take my material, so I saved it here in a shelf, and it's this one. It's gonna drag it in here, and it's gonna flood fill the entire material. And now we need to also here, as I did for all my secondary materials here, group them so we can have essentially independent material groups. And it's going to be evident why I'm doing this here as well later on. Group, because I have a metal material to incorporate as well under the Rust. So I'm going to reveal essentially the metal through the Rust in places. And now here, I'm going to create a mask stack here group. Go in here into my stack here and paint in so we can compare the projected underlying base color towards this color here. So let's see here if we can go in here and tweak my Rust material. Kind of need to grade it down a bit. So the base color here, like so. These splotches here, let's grade them down a bit as well. So we can do that in this one. Either I do this, or I'm making this one darker. Maybe like that. It kind of resembles a bit what's going on there. And we can now grade this as a package as well. So that's the basis here for my Rust here in the bottom. And now I'm just gonna drag in a steel material as well here. Yeah, so this one we're gonna have under the Rust and just reveal where we wanna have this metal coming through. And it's mainly these weld seams here that I noticed on the real asset. Essentially didn't have any Rust. It was like revealed pure metal. So let's do that. So I'm gonna go back here into my layers and say I could just have a mask on this one. So it depends here in what order we want to do this. We're gonna have the Rust on top here like so, and then I'm just gonna make a secondary essentially mask here onto my Rust to reveal the underlying metal. So we can now create layer mask onto this Rust material on its own there. Let's take my scratch brushes. I'm gonna take my scuff here and start to go in here and paint in the metal part here. We can enable some of these masks here to get a better sense. So now I can just go in here and paint on my mask here where I want to have this metal shining through here onto all of these weld seams and locations where I want essentially have a glint of pure metal revealed here. And in some cases here I need to go in and adjust the mask here between the layer regions, and that's something I'm gonna do globally. Now after I've done this pass, I'm just gonna go in here and recreate or essentially adjust all of these masks here so they closer match the asset, because there was kind of like a work in progress. I did the initial pass here for the metal part here, and now let's focus on the actual regions for these materials here. We can see here I did in the earlier episode I did a very rough pass, and we now obviously need to look at this more in detail and refine this. So essentially have my mask setups here. I'm just gonna jump over here into my current channel and take, for example, here this yellow mask here. Remember, in the earlier episode I split this out in separate channels because I wanted to have control over the complexity within these and go full on here, make a separate mask channel out of this, and then copy this result into the live layer stack later on. So let's take a look here at my layers, and this is kind of the setup here, and we can see here there's quite a lot of nodes here to build this, and now essentially can go in here and add or subtract stuff here. For example, here, let's say that we want to go in here and work further on this. I can start to paint and key and do all of these that we essentially did in the earlier episode. So now here, I'm just going to take a pause, going in here and actually cleaning up some of these masks here. And we'll catch you on the other side after I've done all of this. So now let's do a time lapse. Okay, so after all of this adjusting of the masks, and I essentially copy and paste the result here into my mask groups, as we did in earlier episode. Just take a look at that first, because some of that is fundamental and will not repeat that part in this episode. I'm now gonna essentially export my channels, this work in progress, and take a look at where we are and see what we need to adjust when we have this properly lit. So let's render it out and look at a turntable together. Okay, so something I noticed from the turntable is we got this metallic sheen, and that's not really what I'm after for this, because it's kind of paint and this one shouldn't read as metallic. So let's jump into Mori again and see where this comes from. Okay, so back here in Mori, now let's take a look at the metallic channel in particular and see what this one consists of. So I'm using like essentially the stock materials for some of these, and I noticed here this is kind of what the metal contribution is and spitting out. And we can see here we get values in the paint where we essentially have metal where I shouldn't have. And this is kind of the contribution here, why I get all this. Whilst in here in my metal stream here, you can see it here. So going into here into the material, so that you can go in here into each material group and just add a color here on this specific stream only. So you can do this if you make a color and just insert it and then go here and make this black pair group. So we can copy this one, go into my red and paste this one into the red and go into my green, paste it into the green, orange, and then later on yellow. So now I have pasted essentially this black into the metal stream only onto all my layers. So let's go back here to my principled BRDF and take a look at, we should see a bit of a difference here as well. Probably harder to see it in Mori than when you actually render it, because yeah, the preview in the shaders is okay, but it's not like 100%. So yeah, we can actually here go in and disable some of these to see here now. For example, let's take the red one here and just go in here and disable it. And you can kind of see here in Mori, you get this kind of metallic sheen there that you don't get when you have this metallic turned off. So I'm gonna re-export now and we can compare A and B before and after I did this change, okay? Okay, so here is the before and now let's swipe after. So this is the change here when I went in and killed off the metallic contribution of these paint layers here. You can see here it's kind of a big difference when you get this specular reflection rather than this metallic reflection. And this is where I see when I look at the model, I don't have any metallic reflections in the actual paint. Okay, so now let's continue to work up this asset further. Another thing here, if I go in here and scrub this, you can see here when I get to this border edge here, you can kind of see a line here. And this is, I covered this in another episode, how to patch this, but I started to use a 3D material in the border edges where we have this UV seam. Yeah, so let's focus, for example, here on this seam here. I disabled some of these changes I created here, and you can see how I disabled my fix. So we can see if I enable it, there you can see now we have material without this border. So essentially what I did was I have this 2D material in the bottom. I also have this 3D material that we created in another episode that is essentially the same material but now with a 3-planar projection. I'm treating it the same here. I'm grading it using the same value and saturation and HSV and all of those base properties is the same. I'm essentially just painting here a border area. If I go in here, I can add or remove. Essentially, if I paint with black, it will start to show the problem area. If I paint with white, wherever I paint with white, it will start to essentially patch these areas. And so I did this for all of the seams where I can see here, I can see a seam there. So if I go in and enable all of these materials again, it will then be totally seamless between 2D and 3D projection. And also went in here and did some additional HSV in the color just to tweak the final look here. For example, here I went in and additionally graded both of these. If I enable the green material, I graded the color for each individual zone to better match my asset and my references. And then I rendered out a turntable to check my progress. After this turntable, I will now start to pay my attention to integrating dirt on top of all of these materials. Okay, so let's start to focus on the dirt mask. So I'm just going to take one of these masks here and copy and paste it. So we get a brand new channel stack, copy and paste, and we can just name this dirt mask like so. And let's go in here and take a look here. I'm just going to delete some of this here and just start from scratch essentially. So I wanna start to key out some of these dirt here that lives on top, not concentrating on material. Now I'm gonna try and isolate the dirt as much as I can. And we can see here this one clearly is like been raining and soil has been running down. So I'm gonna try and, for example, establish as much of that as we can. So I'm just gonna take my color picker here, make sure that we are in raw pixels, take this color here and pick it, and then enable this mask and see here what we get out of the box. And now here start to play with the error here. Kind of gives me some of these values here. So now I'm just gonna copy and paste this one. So we get another secondary one here, and let's take something else here and let's take a look at this side. I'm gonna go in here and disable the mask and see here. This one here definitely looks like something we could pick up. I'm just gonna pick that color as well here in my mask here and see what we get. That color, and this kind of starts to bring out that. So now if I now go in here and take my group, essentially, and all of this is covered in earlier episodes, so if you don't know what I'm doing here, take a look at my earlier episodes when I keyed out these regions. Let's see here, compare on and off, and let's see here, we can now make another, try and isolate stuff for this region here up here and see what we get. Just gonna copy and paste this region, go in here, disable this. Is there any dirt here? Yeah, there's probably some dirt we can pick out. That kind of looks like something. Play with the arrow a bit. I'm gonna screen this on top. I'm going through one of each group here and trying to pick out. And obviously here, in the end, I can then make a layer on top and start to add or subtract to this as well. So the initial key is just to get essentially a base to work from, and then I do additional touch-ups where I think it's needed, or if there's places where I don't want this mask to live, I can just paint on top. So now let's jump into a more finished version out of this, and we can see here how it ended up looking when I have done some work on this as well. Here's the dirt mask after I essentially progressed a bit more. So I have a few more keys here, and I balanced some stuff here. And the next thing is to bake this mask out and apply it to a dirt material that's going to be covering the whole asset, and this is going to be driving where this dirt is applied. Okay, so let's do that next here. I'm just gonna go into my base color here, and this is essentially me applying this using this sand material that I took. And the sand material, I just borrowed one here from my shelf and go to Mori materials. And I found the sand one here somewhere. Yeah, this one. I took this one, applied it on top of the whole asset. So let's go in here and disable this mask here. If I enable it completely, it just looks like this. I can dial it down, but then I also have this dirt mask that is looking like the one that I copy and pasted. Essentially, I baked out the dirt mask that we created in the channel. And I also did some additional painting here on top when I had this in context. You can see here, I manually painted some of this dirt integration into areas where I thought when I looked at this, I need some extra work. So I'm just gonna dock this down there and let's take a look here. I started to paint a bit extra, and if I would like to have even more, I can do that. I can now balance the strength fully semi-transparent, because in the look, when I looked at my asset, you have some kind of semi-transparent dirt. You can see here, if I start to tweak this material on top of the material, this is like the strength of the dust lives here on the asset. Then I noticed on my asset here, let's take a look, in flat shaded, I also went in here and keyed out the regions further, because I saw that in my asset I had some spillover paint essentially going from one geometry to the other, or from one surface to the other. And I kind of updated my regions a bit further as well in this stage here. And then I started to shift my focus to making a displacement. We're gonna look at that next here, how we can make a displacement. Because this area here, if I look at the model, or if I look at the asset, this paint here is essentially flaked off, and I wanted to achieve something similar with the displacement map. So let's take a look at that next. Okay, so this is kind of where we want to get to, where we can see a bit of peeled paint. So let's take a look at how we can set this up in Mori. So what I did here was essentially, I'm gonna delete now this shader here. I'm gonna go to my shaders, and we can do this from scratch. I'm gonna dock it here and delete this displacement shader that I created. This is what I did. So I took a Principled BRDF shader and I named this disp. This is just for a preview shader essentially. And I'm just gonna essentially make this somewhat, I'm just gonna take my specular response so we get some highlights and tweak this one. What I did was to hook up make a displacement channel so we can make a new one here so we can see how I went about. So let's make a disp 2 here. It's a scalar channel. We want to have this disp 2. I'm going to set the base color to 50% gray, and I'm going to plug this into the bump here. So I'm going to take my disp 2 like so. So nothing will happen at this stage. Let's go into my layers and look into disp 2 here as layers. I now want to have a secondary color and group this as well, group layers. I'm just slightly gonna tweak this one, essentially above. I'm gonna take a gray value and then I'm gonna like make it like 51, for example. So nothing is gonna happen here still. And what I did was essentially take all of my render regions. If I go here into my color, I took all of my these regions here. This one, for example, if I copy this one, the turquoise, copy. So I want to copy this one, copy, and go into my newly created channel, the current channel, and say disp 2. I want to now create a mask stack out of this. So let's create a mask stack. Like so. I'm gonna dock this down here under there. I'm gonna paste into this. And you will start to see some slight values there. Now if I go into my shader, the disp shader, you will start to see these border edges there. If I crank up the preview on this, hold on. Shader, go into my disp. I'm just gonna go in here and say Mori surface, crank this to 1. And now you can start to see here that something happens. That's a bit aggressive, or there's a 10. I'm gonna take this one. And now here, you can start to see here, I want to emphasize these border edges. So with a soft brush here, I'm gonna take my basic brushes, take something like flow linear or something. I'm gonna go into this layer here, and you will see here what I'm gonna do. So on top of this, I'm gonna make a paint node, and now I'm gonna start to paint in values here. And you can see here, now I'm essentially reinforcing the edges, but gradually, so it looks like it's peeling off. And now obviously, depending on how you treat this, it's gonna look like more or less like it's peeling off, like so. And now I can control the height of this operation with this slider here, and it's all masked out by the region. So essentially what I did was to, let's go into and hook up the second, the real one, so we can see this in action. So going to my shader again and say, take disp one, this one, disp, and we can see all of the regions. So I did that. I went into and reinforced some of these edges, more or less. Let's go into my layers. We can see here, spend some time here just going in, tracing in the border edges. I used mostly this pour one to reinforce the edges, like so. And then I'm gonna use this map as a displacement to displace out these peeled edges on top of the bump map, so we get geometry changes as well as fine displacement change, or like fine changes. Okay, so let's go through here and take a look at the individual channels and what I've did here to finalize this asset. So I continued to work on integration, the dirt a bit more, and what I ended up doing was to, if I go in here and disable this mask here, I started to paint some additional variation into areas of the dirt here. And the dirt mask as well here, if I enable this one again and dock this down there, I have some additional work here. I can go in and look at these all together here. And let's go current paint target and say dirt mask. So this is the base dirt mask. I add some additional work on top. So let's take layer and below, current layer and below. So base, I have some painted dirt on top. I had some removed dirt here. I'm not sure if I used that one in the end. But then I'm having a global fade here. In the previous one, I faded this here on the layer, but then I started to, instead having this one to 100% and then having just a color to fade this instead. So I multiply this value down. Whatever value I have here is gonna then eat away from this. So if I take this one to black, there's gonna be 0 of this mask, and here's 100% of the mask. I also worked on the roughness, for example. In my asset, I noticed that the paint, especially around this area, is a bit shinier, and also here on this red paint, I also saw that some of the materials is a bit shinier in the back there, and it's a bit shinier there. So I added here on my turquoise, let's see here, individual on the specular roughness channel, I added here some painted, so this one is essentially I painted a soft mask, dark, and I'm just adding these values here so it becomes a bit shinier. I did the same on the turquoise. Here I have a special layer here on the turquoise only, just to get the values down a bit there, so it becomes a bit shinier in the roughness. Look at the specular. The specular just is from the materials itself, and it looks like this at the moment. Assumption here on the color I also did on the base color that I should mention is I did a touch up, especially on this turquoise. Let's go down here and take a look at, I have there on the color, you see all of these values here. This green, it looks like toxic green. So I ended up making just a paint layer where I started to paint out some of these green values. So I just sampled the color here, this blue there, or this turquoise, painting out these green values locally to this, essentially this paint layer here. Because what I did here in my HSV or in my materials, I swiveled around the HSV. So essentially some of the colors became, you know, inverted and they started to look like toxic green, and that didn't really play nice. So I just went in here and did some touch-ups locally in those areas. That's essentially now the final turntable where we can see all of this summarized. Let's take a look at that before we wrap this.